Welcome to the Deep Dive, a series on digital product and Agile.
It's great to be here for this one. I think it's going to be a really important discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Based on insights drawn from books by the author Matthew Coxall, we are going to embark on a slightly different kind of journey today.
We really are. We're taking a step back from the usual tactical stuff.
Right. And from here on out, we'll just be referring to the author as Matt. But to get us started, I actually want you, yes, you listening right now, to take a second and just visualize your own workplace.
Think about the daily grind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you have ever looked around your organization and felt like your agile transformation is just, I don't know, stuck in the mud, this is for you.
Stuck is the perfect word for it.
Right. Like you look at the org chart and you got all the new team names, you've got the daily rituals, the modern terminology, but the actual day-to-day work still feels incredibly heavy. It feels slow.
And that heaviness is exactly what we want to unpack today.
Yes, so we are welcoming you as a silent third partner in this conversation today. Settle in, grab a coffee, or just keep your eyes on the road if you're driving.
Yeah.
Because we are looking past the superficial layers. We are looking at the system itself.
That is the perfect framing for what we're tackling. Our mission today is an organizational diagnosis.
A diagnosis,
Yeah.
not just treating symptoms.
Exactly. We aren't looking at the symptoms on the surface. We are looking at the underlying condition. And the central argument we're going to explore throughout this entire conversation is this. Agile transformations struggle not because teams fail to adopt practices, but because the surrounding organization continues to operate through structures, funding models, governance habits, leadership behaviors, and decision patterns that were designed for a different era.
Designed for a completely different era.
Yeah.
But just a quick heads up before we get into the weeds today, a bit of a tone check just to set expectations.
Good call. We should be clear about what this deep dive is not.
Right. So if you tuned in looking for a tactical tutorial on how to run a better Jira board or, how to write the perfect user story, you might be a bit disappointed.
Yeah, we are definitely not doing a framework comparison between Scrum and Kanban today.
Exactly. We are explicitly agreeing right now that today's deep dive is not a how-to guide. It is not an Agile training session.
It's a mature, system-level exploration of organizational design.
We want to look beneath the hood of the modern corporate landscape to figure out why the engine is making that terrible grinding noise.
And that grinding noise is so incredibly prevalent. I mean, if we step back and look at that modern corporate landscape, there is a fascinating phenomenon occurring almost everywhere. It's what Matt describes as a facade of success.
A facade. That's a strong word, but it's so accurate.
It really is. Organizations present this incredibly polished image to the outside world and even to their own board of directors. On paper or, on a quarterly update slide deck, everything looks perfectly healthy.
Oh, yeah, the slide decks always look amazing.
Right. They boast that they have introduced agile teams, their executives speak the product language fluently in town halls, they have all the modern delivery rituals in place, the stand-ups, the retrospectives, the sprint planning.
And of course, they have completely overhauled their job title.
Exactly. You don't have project managers anymore. Now you have product owners and scrum masters. You don't have traditional departments. You have squads, tribes, and chapters.
It looks incredible on that slide deck. The typography is modern, the charts are moving up and to the right, and everyone is using the exact right buzzwords.
But then you close the PowerPoint.
Yes, you close the PowerPoint, you walk out of the boardroom, and you go talk to the people who are actually doing the work. You sit down with the software engineers, the UX designers, the mid-level product folks, and the disconnect is staggering.
It's a completely different reality on the ground.
There is this massive, undeniable underlying friction in the air. You ask them how things are actually going, and despite all this shiny new terminology, they'll tell you that decisions still take entirely too long to make.
Weeks or months for a simple yes or no.
Exactly. They'll tell you that priorities drift from week to week based on who yelled the loudest in the last executive meeting. Teams are working incredibly hard, often logging crazy hours to push releases out. And yet, organizational confidence remains stubbornly, almost inexplicably, low.
It's like everyone is running on a treadmill that's cranked up to the highest speed, but the scenery isn't changing at all.
Which brings us to a really specific story from Matt's work that perfectly encapsulates this exact feeling. It's a scenario he refers to as Gray Tuesday, and honestly, it is something almost anyone who has worked in corporate tech will recognize instantly.
Oh, the Gray Tuesday. It's such a visceral description.
I felt my blood pressure rise just reading about this part. I want to paint this picture for you, our listener, Because you have probably been in this exact room.
We all have, right?
Right. Picture this. It's a gray, rainy Tuesday morning. You are sitting in one of those large, brightly lit corporate meeting rooms, the ones with the slightly uncomfortable chairs and that constant hum of the air conditioning.
And the walls. Think about the walls.
The walls of this room are practically papered with project plans. Massive Gantt charts printed out on plotter paper and digital status dashboards everywhere. And all those dashboards are glowing in that reassuring, comforting amber and green. By every single technical measure that the organization tracks, the project is officially on track.
Milestones are checked off, budgets are within variance.
But the atmosphere in the room tells a completely different story.
Right, because as Matt points out, even though all the operational indicators are flashing green, nothing actually feels right to the people in the room.
Not at all.
If you look at the faces of the development teams, they are visibly frustrated, maybe even cynical. Dependencies between different teams are completely unclear, meaning everyone is essentially just waiting on someone else.
Decisions about the architecture or the user experience are stuck in the mud.
Stuck waiting for sign-off from a committee that, doesn't even meet for another 3 weeks. And the reality that everyone in the room knows in their bones, but is hesitant to say out loud to the project sponsors, is that they are merely delivering tasks.
They're just pulling tickets off a board.
Exactly. They are pulling tickets and writing code, but they are not delivering actual value to the customer. They are moving, but they are not advancing.
And this is where the tension just snaps. In that room, amidst all the green dashboards and the forced optimism, someone finally sighs, looks at the perfectly formatted status report, and asks the crucial question.
It's the question that hangs in the air of so many of these transformations. The question is, we're doing everything the process tells us to do, so why isn't it working?
I love that question because it is just so honest. How many times have you sat in a meeting and thought exactly that? You followed the Agile framework to the letter.
You had the daily stand-up.
You kept it under 15 minutes. You pointed your stories. You held the retrospective. You did the dance.
But the outcome is still a total grind.
The product still feels disjointed. The customers are still complaining. And this is exactly where we have to diagnose the gap. Because the realization that Matt came to, and the foundational premise we are exploring today, is that the processes aren't the problem.
You can tweak your estimation methods all you want. It won't fix this.
No. And the people certainly aren't the problem. You have incredibly smart, highly motivated professionals who genuinely want to build great things. The system is the problem. The invisible architecture around those people is fundamentally broken for the type of work they're trying to do.
That is the crux of the organizational diagnosis right there. Organizations don't fail at this because they hired the wrong individuals or because they picked the wrong software tool. They fail because the constituent parts of the organization do not work together coherently.
They are structurally misaligned.
Completely. Think about your own workplace right now. Ask yourself a few hard questions. Do you have incredibly talented engineers, but absolutely no room for them to practice actual engineering excellence because they are constantly rushing to meet arbitrary deadlines handed down from a sales team?
Or do you have grand, ambitious product goals written on the wall, but absolutely no shared understanding across the company of what actual customer value looks like in practice?
Right. Or how about this one? You hire brilliant designers, but the system dictates that you only bring them in at the very end of the process to just, make the interface look pretty.
Long after all the core functionality decisions have already been locked in by a business analyst.
Exactly.
Right.
Or you might have a brilliant forward-thinking business strategy from the C-suite, but absolutely no actual mechanism to translate that high-level strategy into meaningful day-to-day decisions for the developers.
You have teams, you have talent, you have ambition, but you do not have harmony. The pieces are actively fighting each other. And that brings us to the core issue Matt identifies, which is the illusion of transformation.
The illusion of transformation is perhaps the most dangerous phase for an organization to find itself in.
Why is that? Why is it more dangerous than just not transforming at all?
Primarily because it provides the psychological comfort of change without the disruptive reality of it. Organizations so frequently mistake the adoption of Agile practices for actual systemic change. They change the rituals, they change the cadence of their meetings, they buy new software to track their tickets.
But the structural system underneath the actual plumbing of the organization remains entirely intact and undisturbed.
Right. It feels a bit like buying a gym membership, putting on the activewear, walking into the gym, taking a selfie, and then sitting on the bench press scrolling through your phone for an hour.
There's a great analogy. You feel like you've done something, you look the part, but the underlying physical reality hasn't changed a bit.
Or it's like putting a fresh coat of expensive, modern paint on a house with a fundamentally crumbling foundation. You step back and say, wow, it looks so modern, but the floorboards are still rotting underneath your feet.
Matt points out this jarring structural contradiction. By adopting the surface-level practices without changing the plumbing, organizations end up creating what he calls a hybrid monster.
A hybrid monster. It is a very visceral but highly accurate way to describe it.
Let's break down the anatomy of this monster for the listener.
Sure. So on one side, the visible side, they have agile teams. They use modern product terminology. They run iterative ceremonies. They talk about MVP, minimum viable product, and they talk about user feedback loops.
That's the fresh coat of paint.
Exactly. But on the hidden side, the structural side, they still retain waterfall governance. They still use rigid annual project-based funding models. They rely heavily on centralized control and hierarchical sign-offs.
And heavily fragmented accountability, right?
Yes, where no single person actually owns a whole problem. And they continue to measure success using output-based KPIs like how many lines of code were written or how many features were shipped, rather than outcome-based thinking like whether customer behavior actually changed.
They essentially want the adaptability and speed of a speedboat, but they are insisting on steering it with the heavy, sluggish operational mechanics of a massive oil tanker.
That's exactly it.
Now, I want to ground this in a reality that I think will resonate deeply. Let's talk about the story Matt shares regarding the 3,000-page specification.
Oh, this story is incredible.
When I read this, I actually had to put the book down for a second because it was just so painfully familiar. This is a classic tale of a massive, highly visible, multi-year initiative operating under a traditional waterfall structure, but draped in the language of modern delivery.
The worst kind of hybrid monster.
Right. So the first phase of this massive project was entirely dedicated to gathering requirements. The business wanted to know exactly what they were getting before they authorized the build. So analysts spent months and months interviewing stakeholders, writing down rules, detailing every conceivable edge case.
And what they produced at the end of this phase was a physical document that was nearly 3,000 pages long.
3,000 pages.
Let's really pause and think about the psychology behind producing a document of that size for software development. What Matt is highlighting here is the profound illusion of certainty.
Yes, the illusion of certainty. Why do we do this to ourselves?
Well, when human beings are faced with complex, unpredictable problems, like building software for a changing market, we naturally seek psychological safety. And in traditional corporate structures, we find that safety in documentation.
What do you think if we just write it down and it becomes real?
Precisely. The business teams honestly believed that this massive, weighty document guaranteed absolute clarity. They thought if it's written down on page 4,402, it cannot be misunderstood.
And what did the engineering teams think?
The engineering teams, on the other hand, thought this document minimized ambiguity and would finally protect them from the dreaded scope creep. They viewed it as a shield.
And leadership.
Leadership looked at the sheer physical size and weight of the document and thought it created predictability. They treated this massive pile of paper as the ultimate truth, a binding, unchangeable contract for the next 5 years of work.
I can just imagine the sign-off meeting for that document. You know, the clinking of glasses, the congratulatory handshakes. We've done it. We've defined the project.
But what actually happens the second delivery begins?
That's the thing. The minute a developer actually sits down at a keyboard to turn page 42 into functional code, the reality of delivery hits the organization like a freight train.
The interpretations of that 3,000-page document immediately and violently fracture.
Because human language is inherently imprecise, especially when you're describing interactive digital systems. One team read a section regarding user permissions as a loose, flexible guideline. Another team read that exact same paragraph as a strict, unyielding security instruction.
And this is where the system begins to turn toxic. The conversations between departments, which in a true Agile environment should have been highly collaborative problem-solving sessions, instantly turn defensive.
Everyone retreats to their corners.
Engineering starts raising massive red flags about future scalability based on how they interpret the architecture requirements. And how does the business side respond?
They don't want to collaborate. They just point at the document. They say, but this was signed off. We agreed to this 6 months ago.
Exactly. Product managers are caught in the crossfire, trying to mediate between a rigid document and the fluid reality of actually writing software.
But wait, it gets worse. Let's follow this all the way to the end. What happens when this software actually hits the real world?
When the early versions of this system were finally delivered to the customer started finding discrepancies, not just a few. Hundreds of discrepancies.
But here's the critical distinction Matt makes. These weren't bugs in the code.
No, the code functioned exactly as it was written. They were discrepancies based on fundamental misunderstandings of the user's actual needs. Engineering thought the intent of a feature was X based on page 800 of the spec, but the customer's actual workflow required Y.
Every single point of ambiguity in those 3,000 pages, and there were thousands of them, became a hostile negotiation battleground.
The document didn't prevent arguments, it just delayed them until it was incredibly expensive to fix the misunderstandings.
So, bringing it back to our listener, what does this massive failure actually mean for us? It means that detailed documentation, no matter how heavy it is, no matter how many executives signed it in blood, cannot ever replace shared understanding.
Shared understanding only happens through continuous conversation, prototyping, and testing.
Right. The illusion of transformation occurs precisely when we try to solve complex, exploratory, unpredictable digital problems using tools like 3,000-page specs that were designed for linear, predictable, industrial-era projects, like building a bridge or a factory.
And this brings us to a fundamental structural question. It raises an urgent point about how we actually structure our teams to do digital work. Because right now, in most of these organizations suffering from this illusion, we have delivery teams trapped inside non-product structures.
Yes, delivery teams trapped inside non-product structures. This is the core contradiction we really need to examine closely.
It's the root of so much pain.
Delivery teams are being asked, coached, and expected by leadership to behave like empowered, autonomous product teams. But the surrounding organization, the HR department, the finance department, the PMO, stubbornly continues to behave like a project system.
Let's take a beat here because I think we need to do a really thorough exploration of the difference between these two organizational logics. Matt talks about project logic versus product logic.
And honestly, understanding this distinction feels like finding the Rosetta Stone for why corporate tech is so frustrating. They are night and day.
They represent entirely different worldviews on how value is created. Let's start with project logic, because this is the legacy system. This is what most of the corporate world, from finance to operations, was built upon over the last century.
How does work begin in project logic?
In project logic, the entire endeavor begins with a commitment. Someone says, we are going to build exactly this. The scope of what will be built is defined heavily up front, often resulting in those massive specification documents we just discussed.
Right. And then funding is approved specifically against that predetermined scope.
Exactly. The organization essentially says, we will give you $2 million to build these exact 10 features by November.
And what about the people doing the work in project logic? How are they organized?
The people are treated as fungible resources. Teams are essentially assembled like a temporary task force for delivery. You pull 2 developers from this pool, a tester from that pool, and a designer from an agency.
They work together to deliver the scope, and then, crucially, they're disbanded when the work is done.
Right, they move on to the next project. Furthermore, success in project logic is entirely binary and inwardly focused. Was it delivered on time? Was it delivered within the $2 million budget? Did it match the upfront scope document?
Notice what isn't in that definition of success. Did the customer actually like it? Did it solve the business problem?
It completely ignores outcomes.
In project logic, if you deliver a useless feature on time and under budget, the project is marked green and everyone gets a bonus, even if the company loses money because nobody uses the software. It is optimized purely for predictability.
Which, to be fair, is fantastic if you are building a physical bridge. You want predictability when pouring concrete. But it is an absolutely terrible logic if you are building software where the landscape changes weekly.
So contrast that old world with product logic.
In product logic, the fundamental starting point flips. The work doesn't begin with a rigid commitment to a predetermined solution. It begins with a commitment to solving a problem.
You don't say build a chatbot, you say reduce customer support call volume by 20%.
Yes. Funding is allocated not to deliver a fixed scope, but to empower a team to explore that problem, experiment, and learn over time what actually works.
And the teams themselves look very different, right?
Completely different. In product logic, the teams are persistent. They stay together for years. They don't disband after a release. Because they stay together, they build deep, compounding domain knowledge about the customer and the technology.
In this world, Plans aren't treated as blood oaths or promises. They are explicitly understood to be hypotheses. We believe doing this will result in that.
And success isn't measured by an arbitrary delivery date. It's measured by actual business impact and validated learning.
So we have these two completely different paradigms. The friction, that underlying organizational misery we talked about at the beginning, happens because you have these modern, agile product logic teams swimming in an ocean of legacy project logic.
They are structurally incompatible.
And nowhere, absolutely nowhere, is this more destructive and obvious than in the funding disconnect. Matt makes a point here that I think every executive needs to hear. Funding shapes organizational behavior more than any statement of intent ever could.
The money dictates the mechanics.
You can have all the Agile manifestos you want printed on your coffee mugs, but if an Agile team is funded by a temporary fixed-scope project budget, they are structurally forced to behave like a delivery unit.
Let's walk through how this actually plays out in reality. The team is told by leadership to be agile, to embrace change, and to adapt to user feedback. So they launch an early version of a feature, and they learn something profound in week 3 that completely invalidates their original plan.
They realize the customer doesn't want feature A. They desperately need feature B.
In a pure product logic world, the team just pivots and starts building feature B.
But they can't do that here, can they?
Yeah.
Because the finance department is running on project logic.
Exactly. If they pivot to feature B, they are no longer building what was specified in the original funding request. So the moment they try to change direction based on what they've learned, they hit a brick wall.
They have to stop working.
Stop working, go back to the project steering committee, write a change request, justify the deviation, and essentially renegotiate their entire budget approval.
The process is so painful and time-consuming that teams quickly learn it is easier to just build the wrong thing that was originally funded than to fight the bureaucracy to build the right thing.
The financial system literally punishes them for learning.
It's maddening. And this structural trap leads us directly to the illusion of empowerment. This is such a common complaint. Teams can look incredibly empowered on the surface.
They own their daily stand-ups, they manage their own backlogs.
The developers get to write their own user stories, they choose their own retrospective formats, they feel like they have autonomy over their microenvironment.
But structurally, macroscopically, they're completely dependent.
The massive, heavy decisions that actually dictate their day-to-day reality, how their work is funded, the overarching annual planning, the rigid boundaries of their roles and who they report to, those decisions are made in rooms they aren't invited to, by people far away from the actual work.
What Matt is eliminating here is a profound misalignment. These teams are being held accountable for business results, like, why didn't this feature increase revenue? But they do not fully control the levers required to achieve those results.
And when you do that to human beings in a corporate setting, human nature takes over.
It doesn't breed innovation. It encourages massive risk avoidance and highly defensive behavior.
You don't try bold, innovative experiments when you are structurally dependent and held accountable for things outside your control. You just try to survive the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
You optimize for not getting in trouble.
So how do organizations typically respond when they sense this friction? When the executives look down and say, we bought all this Agile training, we have the squads, but things are still slow, people are defensive, and we aren't getting the value we expected.
Do they redesign the funding models? Do they dismantle the project logic?
Rarely. They usually do what legacy organizations have always done when faced with uncertainty and friction. They add governance.
The multiplication of governance. This is where the story gets so frustrating for the listener who is living this day in and day out.
It's a very predictable cycle.
As the organization scales its Agile adoption, or more commonly, as the organization comes under financial pressure and leadership feels a sudden loss of control, the governance layers multiply like rabbits.
Suddenly, your simple Agile process is bogged down.
You get a new executive steering committee, you have to pass a new architectural review board, there's a new security sign-off stage gate that takes 3 weeks to clear.
We have to look analytically at the purpose versus the reality of governance. Why does it exist? Traditional governance, which is a hallmark of the project era, was designed with a very specific goal to reduce uncertainty.
The prevailing logic was that if we force people to make all the difficult decisions up front, and if we have layered hierarchical oversight checking their work at every stage, we minimize the risk of failure.
But that logic is fundamentally flawed when applied to digital product development.
Completely flawed. Because in digital work, uncertainty is not a bug to be squashed. It is a feature of the landscape. It is inherent. You are building something that has never existed before for a market that is constantly shifting.
You cannot plan away the uncertainty.
Therefore, pushing decisions upward, away from the developers and designers who have the actual granular context of the work, doesn't reduce risk at all. It actually creates massive systemic delay.
And delay is often the biggest risk of all in technology.
I want to pause here because Matt lays out a concept in the source material that is just so perfectly stated.
Exactly.
If you are listening to this right now, maybe write this down because it's the analytical anchor for this entire deep dive. It explains so much of the pain.
It is a brilliant distillation, and it's a principle that explains the root cause of modern workplace frustration. Here's the quote. If accountability sits in one place and authority in another, friction becomes predictable.
Let's just let that sit for a second. If accountability sits in one place and authority in another, friction becomes predictable.
It's the defining dynamic of the hybrid monster.
I want you to think about your own role right now, or the teams you manage. Are you held accountable for an outcome? Let's say launching a new mobile app that customers love, but you lack the actual authority to make the decisions required to achieve it.
You can't choose the tech stack. You can't alter the budget. You can't hire the designer you need without 6 levels of approval.
That gap between what you are responsible for and what you are allowed to decide, that gap is where the misery lives.
And we can see the behavioral fallout of that gap every single day. Because teams lack clear decision rights, because the true authority has been stripped away from the squad and moved up the chain to a committee, we see a fascinating and ultimately destructive behavioral shift across the corporate culture.
Alignment becomes a substitute for ownership.
Yes.
Let's make sure we're all aligned.
Oh my goodness, you hear that phrase 50 times a day in these companies? We need to schedule a meeting to ensure alignment. But what does it actually mean in this context? Because no single person on the team actually has the structural authority to just make a call and say, we're going left, the day-to-day work becomes an endless, exhausting exercise in socialization.
Matt details this beautifully as the cost of socialization. When authority is displaced, the specific behaviors it creates are universally recognizable.
It creates those endless meetings that genuinely could have been an email but couldn't be because someone needed to see everyone nod their heads.
It leads to the repeated socialization of ideas, where a product manager has to take a slide deck on a literal roadshow to 6 different middle management committees just to get permission to change the checkout flow of a website.
It breeds a constant, exhausting need for stakeholder reassurance.
And the math on this is horrifying. These socialization activities consume massive amounts of organizational capacity. Everyone's calendar is double booked from 8 in the morning to 6 at night. People are working through lunch just to attend alignment meetings.
But here's the tragedy of it all. None of that activity creates absolutely any value for the customer.
The customer doesn't care how well aligned your internal steering committee is. It merely masks the fact that the authority has been structurally stripped from the people who are actually doing the work. It is performative collaboration to hide a lack of empowerment.
Which brings us to a really crucial and delicate part of the analysis, the profound disconnect between leadership expectations and the organizational reality.
This disconnect creates a psychological double bind for the teams on the ground.
It really does. It makes people feel like they are going crazy because the messaging they get from leaders is consistently inspiring.
Leaders stand up at all hands meetings and say all the right things. They ask teams to be empowered, be adaptive, think like entrepreneurs, be intensely customer-focused.
Innovate and disrupt.
But then, the moment the town hall ends, those exact same leaders simultaneously preserve the underlying legacy structures.
They enforce the rigid annual funding cycles. They maintain the complex matrix reporting lines where everyone has 3 bosses.
They uphold the rigorous risk management stage gates. They preach innovation, but they maintain a system that explicitly rewards caution, control, and predictability.
And here, as we analyze this, we must ensure we maintain empathy for leadership. This is incredibly important for a mature system-level view.
This is not a story of villainous leadership or bad intentions.
No, the executives are not sitting in a dark boardroom actively plotting to make Agile fail. Leaders are acting entirely rationally within the constraints of their own environment.
We have to remember who they answer to. They feel immense pressure and responsibility for the organizational commitments made to the board of directors, to investors, or to Wall Street.
They are held to quarterly earnings reports. So when organizational uncertainty rises, which it always does in software, They naturally hold on to oversight. They grip the steering wheel tighter.
It's a deeply natural human reaction to stress. But what they often fail to realize is that the organizational structure they are preserving in order to feel safe is not just a neutral backdrop.
Exactly. Structure is not passive. Structure shapes behavior. It is an active, undeniable physical force within the company.
Matt points out that if your funding is tied to functional silos, meaning the marketing department gets a distinct budget, the engineering department gets a distinct budget, and RT gets a budget, rather than tying funding to holistic value streams, people are naturally going to optimize for their specific function.
It absolutely does not matter how many inspiring town halls leadership holds about working together as one team. If the financial structure incentivizes siloed behavior and protecting your own department's budget, you will get siloed behavior, period.
This perfectly leads into Matt's harmony model, which I think is a brilliant way to visualize this. He looks at 4 specific domains within a digital organization.
Because this structural contradiction we've been talking about, this friction between project structures and agile teams, it literally pulls apart the collective intelligence of the organization.
Let's look at these 4 domains: product, engineering, design, and business.
Individually, each of these domains brings a crucial, indispensable perspective to building good software. Let's look at their core motivations.
First, you have product. Product pushes for outcomes, market fit, and customer value. They want to solve the user's problem quickly.
Second, you have engineering. Engineering pushes for feasibility, scalability, security, and sustainability. They want to make sure the system doesn't collapse under load in 2 years.
Third, you have design. Design pushes for usability, accessibility, and human empathy. They advocate for the human being looking at the screen.
And fourth, you have business. Business pushes for viability, commercial realities, regulatory compliance, and strategic alignment with the company's financial goals.
Now, in a healthy, well-structured system, those 4 forces act as a system of checks and balances. They balance each other out through healthy tension.
But without a coherent organizational structure to integrate them, like when they are trapped in silos with competing budgets, they stop being collaborating disciplines and they devolve into competing forces. They start fighting each other.
Product is trying to move incredibly fast to shape market direction, but engineering is throwing up roadblocks and saying no because they are uncovering deep technical constraints that product doesn't understand.
Design is forced to work in isolation and discovers major usability issues way too late in the process, long after the architectural decisions are locked.
And business is demanding arbitrary delivery dates and rigid commitments based on external market pressures that the delivery team doesn't even know about.
And the key analytical takeaway here is that no one is wrong in that scenario. That is the tragedy of it. Each domain is acting completely responsibly and rationally within its own narrow frame of reference.
The engineer isn't being difficult. They're trying to prevent a server crash. The business leader isn't being cruel. They're trying to hit a revenue target.
But because they lack a shared mental model, because the legacy organizational structure inherently silos them and pits their metrics against each other, their individual rationality creates massive collective dysfunction.
Okay, let's take this theoretical tension, all these competing forces, and apply a pressure test. Because it's easy to talk about harmony when things are calm.
True tests happen under pressure.
I want you, the listener, to consider what happens in your organization when the pressure is suddenly turned way up. Let's say a major external commitment is looming. A massive marketing launch has been promised to the public on a specific date, or the Q4 earnings are looking soft and the timelines are suddenly tightening.
Or market expectations have suddenly spiked because a competitor just released a killer feature.
What happens to your agile ways of working in that moment of crisis?
What happens is what Matt identifies as a quiet regression. It's vital to understand the nature of this regression.
It doesn't arrive with a dramatic company-wide email from the CEO announcing we are officially abandoning Agile and going back to waterfall.
No, it slips in quietly through the back door. It is almost always framed in the language of pragmatism. You'll hear phrases in meetings like, listen, we all still deeply believe in our Agile transformation, but just for this one specific high-stakes release, we need a little more oversight to ensure we hit the date.
We just need to be pragmatic. I swear, that phrase is the death knell of true transformation. Let's just be pragmatic for Q3. The return of control is swift, but it is incredibly subtle.
Let's look at the symptoms of this regression. Suddenly, without anyone officially changing the policy, decisions that the development squad was comfortably making last month are quietly pulled upward to a director or VP level.
Leaders start requesting much more detailed long-term plans. The hypotheses of product logic are replaced by demands for firmer commitments.
Executives ask for tighter forecasts and absolute guarantees on delivery dates.
And we must observe the immediate behavioral impact this has on the teams. Teams are highly attuned to organizational weather. When they sense this shift, they begin to wait before acting.
They know the environment has changed from trusting to controlling, so they pause. The fundamental nature of their daily conversations shifts completely.
They move away from open exploration, creative discovery, and proposing bold ideas. Instead, their conversations turn entirely into exercises of justification, status reporting, and defending their estimates.
Why do leaders do this? Why do they revert so quickly to the old ways the second things get scary?
Because, as we discussed earlier with the 3,000-page specification, project governance offers the profound psychological comfort of certainty.
Even if every single person in that leadership meeting knows deep down in their bones that the certainty is an illusion because you simply cannot accurately predict complex software development to the day 6 months out, the feeling of certainty, the visual of a green Gantt chart, calms the acute anxiety of leadership.
It's a systemic coping mechanism for stress.
Which leads us to a rather sobering analytical conclusion about the nature of autonomy in these organizations. If autonomy only exists when conditions are favorable, if a team is only empowered to make decisions when the sun is shining, the budgets are flush, and the stakes are low, then it isn't actually autonomy at all.
It's merely conditional delegation.
Exactly, conditional delegation.
That hits hard. The second it starts to rain, management takes the umbrella back.
Yeah.
And this reversion to control under pressure, this quiet, desperate regression to project management defaults, is the absolute clearest sign that the Agile transformation has not actually altered the organizational DNA.
It pulls back the curtain, it strips away the Agile vocabulary, and reveals what the system is truly optimized to do when push comes to shove.
It is optimized to protect the hierarchy and prioritize predictability over value.
It reveals, ultimately, that the organization has successfully adopted the vocabulary of product thinking, but structurally, operationally, and financially, it remains heavily anchored to an industrial-era operating model.
And the friction, that grinding noise we talked about at the beginning, won't disappear until the structure itself is fundamentally redesigned around the continuous flow of value rather than the management of functional silos.
As we begin to wrap up this deep dive, let's connect all of this vast organizational theory back to you listening right now.
We've gone on quite a journey today, peeling back the layers of the modern corporate facade. The big takeaway here is that true organizational transformation isn't about renaming your standing meetings or deciding to call your traditional project managers Scrum Masters.
It is about the incredibly hard, often unglamorous, and deeply political work of redesigning how money, how authority, and how accountability actually flow through the structural pipes of your organization.
When you log on or walk into your workplace tomorrow, take a hard look around. Ask yourself, are you constantly fighting a system that was designed for a different era? Are you trying to operate a fluid, adaptive digital product inside a rigid, factory floor organizational structure?
And to leave you with a final provocative thought to ponder as you reflect on your own organizational structures, let's build on Matt's insights and look just a little bit over the horizon into the near future.
We are currently undergoing a massive, unprecedented, and rapid integration of artificial intelligence and highly automated intelligence systems directly into our software development pipelines.
Because of AI coding assistance and automated testing, the actual execution and decision-making cycles of writing code, which used to take weeks of human effort, are going to compress into days, then hours, and eventually seconds.
Right, the sheer speed of technical delivery is about to go entirely exponential. The bottleneck will no longer be how fast we can type code.
Exactly. The bottleneck shifts entirely to the organization. So consider this. If our current legacy organizational structures already struggle so profoundly with decision latency today, and if they already suffer from misaligned authority and crushing bureaucracy at standard human speeds, what happens next?
What happens when an automated AI-driven workflow that can build a feature in 10 minutes collides head-on with a manual project-era governance committee that only meets once a month to approve budget changes?
Will AI be the force that finally breaks these legacy structures, or will it just scale our organizational friction to the speed of light?
Scaling organizational friction to the speed of light. Now that is something to chew on. Thank you for joining us as our silent partner on this deep dive into the structural realities of digital product and Agile. We hope this gave you a new lens to view your day-to-day challenges. Keep looking beneath the surface and keep questioning the systems around you.